It's time now to get an update on our business news, and indeed it begins with pretty much our top story this hour. It's French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to Washington. Our business editor Yuka Royer is with us. Yuka, a lot of attention on Iran and other issues, but really global trade will definitely be something they'll spend time discussing.
Well, you don't wage trade war with your allies. Those were the words of the French president ahead of his state visit to the United States. Emmanuel Macron wants to persuade Donald Trump to keep European nations exempt from steep new tariffs on metal imports. The US president has granted the EU a temporary exemption from the 25% steel tariffs, but that is set to expire on the 1st of May. Last week, Macron went to Berlin to coordinate his arguments with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Now, Merkel, for her part, stressed the importance of free trade ahead of her own visit to Washington. She opened a trade fair in Hanover with Mexican President Enrique Pena Nieto. The two leaders welcomed a recent agreement in principle on a new trade pact between the EU and Mexico. Here's Merkel speaking at that event.
We know of many common challenges, and we believe multilateral cooperation can add value for everyone. And that's why we're advocating global trade that is as free as possible and which is based on common rules. We believe the World Trade Organization, the WTO, will provide the right framework and that the bilateral trade agreement could be a good complement.
Well, let's look at some trading action now. Asian shares are generally trading lower at the start of the week, following on from a tech sell-off on Wall Street on Friday. As you can see, red across the board with the Shanghai Composite down over half a percentage point. A lot of attention is also on the US Treasury bonds. The yield for the benchmark 10-year note has steadily risen in the past few weeks, almost reaching 3% now. It's at the highest level in 4 years. A narrowing gap between the 10-year and the shorter-term 3-year rates, as you can see, has also been a cause for some concern. It could be a sign that investors are worried about the longer-term economic outlook. Earlier, we asked Stephen Innes, head of trading at Owanda in Singapore, about why bond yields have been rising.
I think there's two factors here. I think the higher bond yields are getting driven partially on inflation, or the anticipation of inflation on the back of the fiscal spend by the U.S., and followed up by these surprisingly high oil prices we've seen develop over the past few weeks. We're up close to 11-12% in oil prices in the past 2 weeks, so that's sparking inflationary fears. But there's also some supply concerns that are entering the market too, that the U.S. will have to fund, obviously, this huge burdening debt that they're under. So this is also backing up bond yields. When bond yields tend to back up, it has that negative implication on a broad case of asset classes in the market. And we're seeing that play out somewhat negatively this morning in global equity markets.
Now, Paraguay has a new president following Sunday's election. Paraguay's economy relies largely on agriculture, but it hasn't suffered much from the falling commodity prices, keeping a 4% growth rate for the past decade. Despite the steady growth, though, the economy hasn't managed to shake off persistent poverty and corruption. Francois Bibo has this report.
Slums, up against gleaming high-rises right in the heart of Paraguay's capital, Asunción. Men, women and children live here among the trash, within view of the country's newly elected parliament. But according to this resident, politicians don't care about the poor.
They do come see us when they need our votes. They show up, they introduce themselves and chat with us, but as soon as they get to power, they forget us.
In Paraguay, more than a quarter of the population lives beneath the poverty line, according to the National Institute of Statistics. And yet, the country's economy has been chugging along at a steady 4% over the past decades and shows no sign of slowing down. The IMF forecast 4.1% growth this year and 4.5% in 2019. So what's driving the Paraguayan boom? It's agriculture, or more specifically, soy. But this industry benefits primarily large producers who pay almost no taxes. All the while pushing small farmers and indigenous peoples out from their land to grow soy for export.
Given that Chinese demand for products like soy is set to continue growing, it is unlikely that the current development model will end up reducing poverty, because as demand for soy increases, so too does poverty, as well as the population's needs.
In Paraguay, striking disparities remain within the population. Just 10% of landowners control 92% of farms.
Okay, Yuka Roya, thanks a lot for that business update.